Well, welcome everybody. We're going to start this month's monthly Firefighter Book Club. And for today, we have Gary Ludwig on with his book, Fully Involved Leadership, which I'm on annual vacation right now. So it was great that I got to be on vacation because I actually got to finish reading the book in time to have the meeting today. But I want to have first and foremost an announcement. Not for next month, September. We're still good for Burton Clark. He's going to come on with his book, I Can't Save You, But I'll Die Trying. October's book, however, with Les, he's doing his book. He's in Canada. And we are continuing to figure out logistics on shipping his book to the United States. So what we're going to do is we're going to move him to next year, and we're going to do a bunch of pre-ordering on books, and he's going to ship them all to Red Helmet Training. And then I'll be the postmaster of shipping those out. So we're going to push Les's book back out of October into next year's schedule. And then all of you have probably already read it. If not, get on it. But we're just going to move up Chase Sargent's Buddy to Boss to October. It sounds like what's going to be the plan. I got Chase out here at Red Helmet Training in October anyways. So I'll just knock out a meeting of the book club while he's here hanging out. So that's the plan for October. If you're not reading or you haven't read Chase's book yet, and we're going to talk about the old book. So even if you don't have the newest version, Chase will still talk about what's included in the newest version of Buddy to Boss, but that'll be the plan for October. So, all right. So back to Gary's book. Like I said, hopefully you've all read it. Again, that is the goal of the book club, to get you actually reading the books, not just coming on here and hanging out, but actually reading the book beforehand. And you guys are always welcome to come on and ask questions. Raise your hand in the chat like we've talked about, or even if you want to do it at the end, you don't want to be recorded, just let me know. But we're going to be going over Gary's book with him today. And then if you haven't seen it, Chief Ludwig's other book, 401 Things that an experienced firefighter can tell you, is the other one. So let's turn it over to Chief Ludwig, and let's kind of talk about his book. So good morning, Chief.
Good morning, Jesse. I hope you're doing well.
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm blessed beyond measure. I count my blessings every day. Even on my worst day, I feel blessed.
Well, I'm glad that you came on the show. I know that I just saw you at FRI in a brief passing moment. You were busy as usual. FRI is definitely a crazy place, especially when you're heavily involved in IAFC like you are with the International Association of Fire Chiefs. But in passing, it was like, hey, are we still good for the book club? Yes, we are. And it was like that.
Yeah, you were carting all your stuff down the ramp there at the Westin Hotel, and it was about 105 degrees outside. And so I think we both agreed that wasn't going to be a very long conversation. So
no, it was definitely warm. Well, I was carting all of the camera equipment too. I was going out to do firefighters and fire trucks getting ice cream.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. So that episode was warm. Like I did an episode with Billy Goldfeder in Atlanta when FRI was in Atlanta. I thought that was warm. No, it was warm. So,
I would assume your ice cream didn't last very long in that heat. So
I took John Tippett out from the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation, and I told him, I said, I'll tell you a big lesson I learned from the Chase Sargent episode is get a milkshake, because you'll have ice cream running. Like Chase had ice cream running down his hand and all kinds of stuff. So I said, get a milkshake, trust me. So it all worked out. But yeah, it was good to see you at FRI and good to see you here on Zoom. This is, I think, the one good thing that came out of COVID is we're figuring out some cool other ways to connect with firefighters across the country and do some cool training. So
Roger
welcome.
That, yes.
So let me get started. I got a couple of questions. And I want to start off with just the beginning, like the two leadership qualities that you talk about in the book. Right off the bat, competence and character. Can you expand on some of those, like how they came into where you consider those to be the two most important characteristics, and some ideas on that?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a student of learning about leaders and learning from leadership. And I have studied leaders in the fire service. I have studied leaders in the military and in the business world. And I look for traits. One of the things I've done is look for traits and what makes someone an extraordinary leader. And I've come to the conclusion that it's the two C's, it's competence and character. So you have to be very competent at what you're doing, but you also have to have character. So When you look at the fire service, you could have every credential you can think of. You can have the fire officer 1 and 2, the 3 and 4, and hazmat, up to hazmat, technician, rope technician. The list of things goes on that you can be certified in. But if you're untrustworthy, if you lie, if you have no character, if you cheat, if you have no ethics whatsoever, nobody's going to see you as a leader. And the inverse is true of that. So you can be the most trustworthy person in the world, but if you have no competence, if you're not competent in what you do in our profession, nobody's going to see you as a leader either, because they're going to discard whatever you got to say when it comes to something as it comes to to our profession on fighting fire or car extrications or dive rescue or water rescue or marine rescue, whatever the case might be. If you don't know what you're talking about, they're certainly not going to listen to what you got to say. So you got to have the 2 C's. And I always look at the Enron scandal that happened a few years back, where there was people that were very competent when it came to finances, but what they had no ethics because of what they were doing. So again, you got to have the 2 C's, as I call it, the competence and character component. Otherwise, no one's going to ever view you as a leader or listen to what you got to say. They're not going to follow you as a leader unless you have competence and character.
Well, and I think those 2 things lead to really a lot of what you talk about. And I think it's chapter 15. It goes back to trust. They have to trust that you're going to make the right decisions for them personally, and at the same time going into the fire. Are they going to trust you taking them into a burning building? So, yeah.
It's true. I have worked with a chief, just an incessant liar. You would go to lunch and you went be at lunch with this individual, and he had a chicken sandwich. And when you come back into the office, the secretary might just in passing say, "What'd you have for lunch?" And he would say, he would just lie. He'd say, "I had a fish sandwich." Why he would lie about what he had for lunch, I have no idea. But he lied about everything. Nobody trusted what this individual had to say. And so, when they have no trust in you and they have no faith in you, and your ethics are such that, that they're just down, somewhere, at the lowest levels, no one's going to see you as a leader, because anything you got to say has no value whatsoever. And that's one of the things I always say, Jesse, is I tell my firefighters all the time, I will never, even my city manager, I will not lie to you about anything, because once I lie to you and you lose trust in me as a leader, that I can't get out. That is a long climb out of that hole once you lose trust. So as difficult as conversations I have sometimes with my firefighters, and the rule is here where I'm at, is that you can ask me anything you want to know, and I will tell you whatever is going on, except I won't talk about personnel issues. If someone got divorced, or, seeing a counselor or something like that, or someone got disciplined, I won't talk about personnel issues. And they know that rule, but anything else is wide open. I just, my administration building here is attached to my main fire station. And, I was just down in the kitchen a half hour ago, and guys were asking me what I got going on today, what meetings and whatnot. And I told them, and we got into a conversation about something, and I tell them everything. I have no secrets whatsoever about what's going on. And that has helped establish me and report my firefighters. They know they can ask me a question. And you know what? I accept their feedback. Sometimes they might have an answer I haven't even thought of. So I share everything, and I have no secrets, because trust is so important in our profession.
Yeah, and I think you talk about that multiple times throughout the book. Is I will make sure that my people understand what's going on, and as long as it's not a personnel issue, I'm going to be willing to share, even if they might not like the answer that you're going to tell them. But you're going to gain a lot more from that than if your people are always asking, especially in your position as the fire chief. If they're always wondering what's going on, not either because you're not being truthful, or you're just not telling them what's going on, then they're going to start making up their own truth. And we all know how that goes in a fire station. Well,
now you just hit on what I was going to say, because if you don't give them the information, they will fill it in some way or another. And it usually is not the accurate truth of what's going on.
Well, like you said, your guys were at the kitchen table. That's where that all happens. So if you're not in there occasionally, they're gonna make up their own story.
Well, I I get invited by them to have lunch with them often, and I usually take them up on that because, as I always tell them at the end of the meal, the food was good, but the company was even better. And I really cherish that time with my firefighters. There's nothing more important than that firefighter kitchen table, that firehouse kitchen table, I should say. That's where a lot of things get said and a lot of bonding occurs. And that's probably the most cohesive thing we have in the fire service is that kitchen table. And so the opportunity to sit down and break bread with them is something I always welcome. And it's an opportunity for them to ask me questions. And we laugh just like anybody else does at a kitchen table in the fire station. And sometimes the conversations gets pretty, enlightening or very colorful. Maybe that's the right word I want to use. But at the same time, I cherish that relationship I have with them. They're outstanding people.
And how many stations do you have?
I have 6 here in Champaign.
Okay. So yeah, occasionally getting around and having lunch at some of those other places too. And I'm sure there's plenty of great food out there.
It is. I've had to limit myself during the COVID. And it's also been a little bit of an adjustment for me coming. I spent 25 years in St. Louis and 10 in Memphis. So, coming from Memphis to Champaign, we have 58 stations in Memphis, and then to come here to 6 is a little bit of an adjustment for me, but it's okay because I know everybody here by their first name now. So,
right. Well, and I'm sure there was probably plenty of food to go around in Memphis at the kitchen table.
As I like to tell people, when I came to Memphis, I weighed 150 pounds, and look at me now. So,
yeah, I'm
so
sure
that's the type of meals I had.
Food. Yeah.
Oh my God, I never had a bad meal in Memphis. They know how to cook. Oh my God, they know how to cook. Even make popcorn. The best popcorn I ever had was in Memphis. So
that's awesome. So I guess I'm going to jump around to a later chapter then, because it brings up another thing where you talk about like gauging the complaining in there, right? At the kitchen table, you're going to hear complaints, and you kind of talk about like gauging it. Like, is it somebody that hardly ever complains and for whatever reason they are complaining, or is it the person that is just a habitual complainer? But you talk about gauging not only the people, but what else does it talk about in there?
So, yeah, as a leader in the fire service, whether you're a company officer or a battalion chief or a deputy chief or a fire chief, firefighters, they will complain, and it's okay because that's a good thing. That's how we get change. But I caution officers to measure the quality, as I say, of the bitching. And that means, as an example, when I came here, when everybody's complaining about the same thing and it's nothing that benefits them directly, like, hey, I need more vacation time or we need more pay, but it's something about the department itself. If everybody's bitching about it and it's something that's not a direct benefit to them, then you better listen to what they got to say because it's pretty valid. And as an example, when I came here, we had a lot of issues with our maintenance program on our trucks and our apparatus. Everybody was complaining about it. And as a fire chief, I realized that's one of the things I need to address, to just ignore that and say, quit your complaining. It would have not been the right solution to that. I need to be a leader and measure the quality of the bitching. If I have one person who's just bitching about the water fountain, and he's the only person or she's the only person bitching about the water fountain, I'm not going to put a whole lot of credibility into that. I'm not going to put a whole lot of effort into that. But if I got everybody complaining, so you as an officer in the fire service need to do, as I say, to measure the quality of complaining. And you just said it. If you got one person who never complains about something and you hear them complaining, that is also another indicator that you need to understand and be really attentive to what they're complaining about, because there's probably some validity to it.
Yeah. Well, we talked about the book that I'm writing right now, Strategies and Tactics for Employee Fires. I actually relate that to a smoke detector. You as that company officer are watching for those smoke detectors, and you have some of those smoke detectors that are just constantly going off, right? That ringing alarm that you go to all the time, that sometimes you can even get complacent to it. It's like, oh, we go to this church for this ring alarm all the time, and it's never a fire. It's never going to be a fire. And then all of a sudden you could have an employee fire going on there. But at the same time, you as a company officer, it takes trust, going back to the trust thing, for them to allow you to put a smoke detector in them right? Because that's what you want. I want my people coming to me and saying, hey, did you hear this is going on? Or did you know this is going on? But if you don't respond appropriately to that alarm either, if they come in and say, hey, Joey's got a problem, and you're like, what? I'm going to go talk to him right now. And you get all, then it's amazing how quickly those batteries will get taken out of those smoke detector systems for you too. So it's not only gauging the complaining, but responding. Or if you have those smoke detectors going off and the fire department never shows up, well, then you don't care about us or our complaints or our gripes or grievances or whatever. So yeah, it's a fine balance for sure.
I actually do listening sessions once a year. I will cluster the stations, and I'll actually go and on each shift and just listen to what they want to talk about, questions they have. And it usually, I find a lot of value in it. Sometimes someone comes up with a great solution about some idea I thought, man, I didn't think of that. That's something that we should implement. So it gets down to that also is also the listening part. And you're right. I love the smoke detector analogy. And so, yeah, if the smoke detector is constantly going off, I love that analogy. And I think I can't wait to read your book, quite frankly. I think it's going to be outstanding. I love that whole concept of how you're approaching your book.
Well, I'll be honest. I have firefighters that are smoke detectors that you just want to take a broomstick to. You know who that is too.
Yeah.
So
you just knock it off the ceiling, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So that brings us to another thing that you discuss in there is as you're going around and you're doing these listening sessions and you're getting the feedback. You also talked about that some of these firefighters have come up with some great ideas, and you talked about kind of delegation as part of the time management, and most of the time they would exceed your expectations, right? And it even sounds like maybe delegating for you in the early portions of your chief officer career was difficult. Like most of us, we don't want to delegate when we first get there. But tell us about some of the projects that you've seen, some of these guys that you've given your crews that they've gone above and beyond that you were not expecting.
Yeah, so what you say is absolutely true. I early on, and I just had this conversation with my son who flies for the Air Force a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about his hardest challenge is as an officer is not assigning projects out, and that he wants to micromanage. And I told him, hey, I had the same problem, and I think we've all had that problem, is that nobody can do it better than us. And so I learned eventually, though, that I can't do everything. And, the higher you go, there's many projects. And so as a result of that, you have to learn how to delegate out. And what I found was just don't delegate out, but also give them the expectations of what your vision is of what you want to achieve in the end. And I have found out that I have proven myself wrong, that, there are some people that can do it better than me. And there's some very bright and intelligent people in the fire service. And given the opportunity, and given the opportunity to take a program and change it and make it successful, has proven to me that delegation is the exact answer. And so when you ask me for examples, I can think of all kinds of examples. When I went to Memphis, I was hired down there they had a very challenged EMS system, and they created a deputy chief position on the senior command staff to run their EMS system. And the EMS system had been neglected since the early 90s. And this is 2005. So it had really deteriorated. And so I had really no command staff within the EMS bureau. Everything had been under battalion chiefs. Each ambulance in each battalion was under a battalion chief. And I mean, they still were using steel oxygen tanks when I went there because nobody had addressed it. They weren't using aluminum or composite tanks. A lot of things have been neglected. So I had to put a command staff back in place. And so it was going to be a 3-year phase-in project. And so one of the things I definitely needed for an 1,800 member department like that was an infectious disease control officer in the EMS command staff. So by the time I think I got done, I had something like 26 lieutenants and 5 battalion chiefs and the division chief and the secretaries and whatnot. But I wanted to take one of those lieutenants and make an infectious disease control officer because we needed an infectious disease control program. As I say, you can either die from a wall collapse or you can get stuck by a needle. Both are recorded as a line of duty death. And so an individual by the name of Barry Nash, who I had the utmost respect for now. I hardly knew him at the time, but he made lieutenant, and he was willing to take on that infectious disease control program and become our infectious disease control officer and build that program. And and I kind of give him my vision of what I thought it should look like. He far exceeded my expectations of what it should look like. He became, as an example, he made himself available not only 8 to 5 Monday through Friday, but 24 hours, 7 days a week. He had his phone on. That if someone had some type of exposure or significant exposure, if they got blood splashed in their eyes or whatever, he was able to evaluate that and give them the right direction on what to do. The follow-up was continual. He always looked for preventive ways of he can prevent needle sticks, splashing, vaccinations, whether it be hepatitis A or B, flu shots. I remember him storing shots up in his office where he was actually administering flu shot. The list of things that he did went on and on and on and on. And he made a significant impact when it came to infectious disease control within the Memphis Fire Department. And so I can repeat that story among many individuals over my career that have just made a significant contribution with the program they've taken and run with it. And you know what? They stumble, Jesse, sometimes, and that's okay. Make the errors. I don't care. We'll fix it. We move on. I'm not going to punish you. I'm not going to chastise you. There's no discipline if you mess up. It's okay to mess up. We fix it. We understand where we messed up and we move on. And yeah, there was a couple stumbles that Barry had and ran on a few obstacles, but you know what? That's okay, Barry. Let's fix it. Let's move on and let's make it better. And again, I can't stress enough how intelligent people in the fire service are and how innovative they are, and they will find a way to get things done.
Well, like you said, it's not only delegating is a huge portion, because it's also not only getting stuff off our plate, but giving them the opportunity to spread their wings and do stuff. And a lot of times we're just we don't know how to delegate. I think that's especially the newer officers. If you come into your crew and go, I'm just overloaded, I need you guys to take this on and do this for me, and you don't give them any, first and foremost, like you said, the vision. You give them, hey, I'm here. If you need me, give me a phone call, send me an email. Here's your budget. Don't just go, hey, take this because I'm overloaded. You're looking for the right person for the right job and giving them all the tools they need to actually you delegating it out.
And I'm going to stress this. I saw this when I worked in St. Louis. You have people working on projects, bust their butt to get it done, and then somebody else, the chief above them, takes the credit for it. Drove me insane because it happened to me. And so I can't stress this enough to your listeners. If you delegate out and you give people responsibility and they make a significant difference, you better give honor and praise and give them all the credit for what they've done and continually reinforce that behavior. Never, I can't stress enough, never take credit for someone else's work. And unfortunately, I've seen that not only happens to me, but I also seen it happen to other people. And if you want to bust somebody's, what's the word I'm looking for, their energy to get something done, go ahead and take the credit for what they did. Should never do that.
Yeah. Well, it gets to the point where they don't really do too many favors for you after that. That's for sure.
No,
yeah.
Absolutely not.
Well, that brings up another thing that you talk about in the book is honoring your people and doing award ceremonies. And I think there's still a lot of fire departments out there that struggle with that. Unfortunately, don't praise their people enough. And whether it's an annual award ceremony or just typing up a letter, and it doesn't have to be from the fire chief's desk. I know that hanging out with Chief Ludwig today from his desk's perspective, I'm at a captain's perspective. It doesn't take much to type up a note, or, one of my favorite things that Brunacini always talked about is just little Post-it notes that he would put on people's desk or on their reports or whatever, like, hey, you're doing a great job. And I know that you are a big proponent of that. It shows not only just that chapter, but throughout the book is praising your people.
Yeah, we are so quick in the fire service to point out the negative and, and discipline and that's another topic because I hardly ever discipline, quite frankly. I don't think it's a tool that I use and it's used rarely. I rather educate and mentor and teach and when somebody does something wrong, because I don't think they did it on purpose. But aside from that, let's talk about, you're right, giving praise. We're quick to discipline, it seems like, in the fire service, and quick to point out somebody's shortcomings, but we're not quick to praise people when they do an outstanding job. And I'm a strong, it seems like people are adverse to it, Jesse, that, that there's some type of weakness that that you praise people. And I think that it's a virtue that you're able to do that. And so I firmly believe in giving praise and honor and recognizing those that have done an outstanding job. And I have a variety of different things that I do around here, including I give out, it's right here on my, right here to my left is a game ball, that if somebody does something outstanding for that day that I think is outstanding, we have a big little ceremony, if you want to call it, a little big ceremony, whatever term you want to use, but, I give them a game ball. And besides, I try to participate in every success my firefighters have. And, whether it's even somebody making their probation, that I'll make time out to give them their new shield for their helmet, or when it comes to actually the actual badge pinning ceremonies, we do those. I can go through a list of different things, including our annual award ceremony. We give out chief's letters of recognition. There's a list of things that we do here. And it doesn't even have to be those things as much as maybe just some simple words to someone, telling them that that's pretty cool what they just did. That was outstanding. I thought that was pretty cool. I don't mind telling people that also, just a verbal word of what they did. And you should always share in a firefighter's success, and always emphasize those successes and let them know they did an outstanding job.
Well, I talked about this in the Jared Sergi episode of the firefighter getting off probation. And me and Jared have had this conversation a couple of times that, well, it's their day 365. And what are we doing for them? They're in the kitchen making our crew this big meal, instead of what we should be doing for them is making them a meal because it's their last day of probation. And it just drives me nuts. And you brought up the badge pinning ceremony. I had a firefighter that I had with me on probation, and they're probably about 2 weeks into their probation. They have all of their safety equipment, but they don't have their badge yet. We didn't have our badge come at the end of the year. They actually get it at the beginning. Well, this firefighter didn't have their badge. So I contacted my battalion chief through email, said, oh, Firefighter Garcia doesn't have his badge yet. And the battalion chief was like, oh, sorry, I don't know how we missed that, because that comes from the fire chief's desk. Our personal protective equipment guy, he can give that firefighter Garcia everything he needs, from turnout boots to a bee hood for bee swarms, but the badge comes from the fire chief's desk. So I sent an email to my battalion chief. The BC's like, sorry about that. I'll make sure it gets taken care of. And I'm expecting the fire chief to come down to the station and give this firefighter their badge. And the following week, his badge showed up in an interoffice envelope. And I called the battalion chief up and I said, hey, can you get a hold of the fire chief and see if he can take the time to come down here and at least give him his badge in person? And it's just crazy, and you talk about badge pinning ceremonies, pinning on the badge. What does the eagle represent on your badge? And what does the Maltese cross represent? That helps out with the pride and ownership. And that's where sometimes we're missing the mark.
And where's the badge put? It's put over your heart. So, what you just said, I was going to tell that story too. When I came here, they were doing the same thing. When you got promoted or whatever, they would put your badge in your envelope and put it in your office mailbox. And I was flabbergasted when I heard that. I said, no, we're not doing that. And so I will come in. So we have our badge pinning ceremonies. Not only do I pin your badge on, but then once a year, we actually have our award ceremony, which is named after one of our deceased firefighters who died in the line of duty. We actually have a badge pinning ceremony where I hand the badge to a member of the family, and we all share in the success of that firefighter's accomplishment. Not only myself, but the family, because they didn't get there alone. that firefighter had to have family support to get to where they're at, whether it's a promotion or whatever. They took time away from maybe a soccer game or a baseball game or some other event where they're studying. And so that family is also a part of that success of that firefighter. And so we also have a badge pinning ceremony where the family actually pins the badge on the firefighter in front of everybody in the auditorium. And it does my heart good to see the smiles on everybody's face when that happens, because they're sharing in that accomplishment. It's just a very cool event.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the pictures I cherish. My son was, I think he was about 4 when I promoted a company officer, and you see him, putting my badge on when he was 4 years old. And I don't know. It brings tears. It gives you goosebumps, doesn't it? Yeah. And I had a captain.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I had a guy promote to captain, and it's like, if you're going down to the uniform shop and you're purchasing your own bugles, and your captain didn't pass those bugles on to you and go buy himself some new bugles, there's something wrong. We're doing something wrong.
But I've seen some cool events. The children pinning the badges on their dads, and grandfathers pinning their badges on their children or grandchildren, and it just some very mothers pinning badges on their own sons. It's just some very, very cool events I've seen.
Yeah. So if you got listeners, if you're not doing that yet, that's an easy one to fix. But yeah. Let's see. We were getting into the praise, and then we brought up discipline inadvertently there, right? You talked about a leader is not a hammer. And much like you said, you hardly ever discipline. I've been a company officer now for 17 years, and I think I've literally written up 2 people, and it was only because I didn't have a choice. I would rather coach, mentor, and you talk about the 3 uns, or what I talk about the 3 U's, right? They're either unaware, unable, or
unwilling. Yes.
Or unwilling, right? Yes. When does it cross that line between your coaching and then counseling? If they're unwilling, they know the rules or the policy or the expectations, but they're unwilling to follow them. But even there's a ton of coaching that goes on well before that.
There is. And so, I call them the 3 uns. They're unwilling, unaware, or unable. I have found the majority of people that are in our profession, Jesse, they don't do things with intent to do things wrong. That they either had an at-risk decision, they had a choice between A, B, C, or D, and they chose C when maybe B was a better choice to make. Or maybe they're just unaware, or maybe they need another tool. They were unable to do the job. Can I tell you a quick story? It's going to take a little bit, but it's in the book.
It's your video.
All right. So I go to Memphis, and I meet, I'm the new deputy chief there, and I agree to meet with all the hospitals at this hospital council, kind of like what we had in St. Louis when I was there. So all the hospitals, we all meet once a month. And the first time I meet with them, they're complaining to me that the medics, now they're still on paper, they're still writing their patient care reports on paper. They weren't computerized at that point. This is 2005. And they're complaining that they only leave a patient care report at the hospital about 30% of the time. And I'm astounded at that. So you're dropping off a patient, and you traditionally would leave some type of record of what was done under your care with that patient. And they were only leaving it about 30% of the time. So we leave there, and I'm driving back with this battalion chief who was semi-running EMS before I came there. And I asked him, I said, "Is that right, Mike? Is that true?" He says, "Yep, that's true." And he's offered to me how to fix that. He said that if I just take 2 random paramedic firefighters and give them a 10-day suspension, it will send a message to the whole department that you should leave your patient care report at the hospital. And I said, "Well, thanks for that advice, Mike. I'll take it under advisement, but let me do a little checking." So I'm just not going to take 2 people at random and suspend them because they didn't leave a patient care report at the hospital. So I started asking the medics, "Why didn't you leave a patient care report at the hospital?" They said, "It's a pain in the ass. You got to go find a copy machine. Sometimes it's out of paper. Sometimes you need a code. Sometimes someone's using it. Sometimes it's broken. Sometimes you have to reformat the paper." And each time I asked them, I said, "Wait a minute, you just don't have a tear-off sheet that you just leave at the hospital?" And they said, "No." I said, "Well, that's ridiculous." So I went back, after a couple of weeks, and I asked this battalion chief, Mike, I said, why don't we have a tear off sheet that they can just leave at the hospital, a duplicative type of sheet? And he said, well, that costs $10,000. And I said, well, Mike, we got a $36 million budget, $36 million budget here to run EMS. And I said, I want you to run, next time we print up new sheets, I want you to run with a duplicative tear off sheet. He didn't like it, but that's how we did it. And guess what? Compliance went up over 94% for that. And, it was simple. It wasn't that they were unwilling to do it. It's just that they were unable to do the job. And
Right.
so as a result of that, we were able to fix the system because they were not unwilling, it's because they were unable. We had to make them able to leave that patient care report at the hospital. So I tell people this all the time. If you got a widespread problem in your department, maybe it's not the firefighter, but maybe it's the system. And we try to fix the firefighter when we should be fixing the system, and usually the problem will go away. So it goes back to what I said, Jesse, they're either unwilling, unaware, or unable. If they're unaware, we should be teaching, coaching, mentoring, developing them, helping them grow. If it's unable, we get them whatever it needs to do the job, such as a tear off sheet. Or if they're unwilling, then unfortunately we have to use sometimes discipline to correct behavior and send them a message that this is unacceptable. So that's a long story, but that's plays into what I'm talking about.
Well, and sometimes it's hard, especially when at Memphis. I mean, how many personnel did you have?
1,800 firefighters approximately.
Right. So, and unfortunately, a lot of chief officers would have just gone back to their email and sent out a stern email about percentage, of how many EMS run paperwork are dropped off at the hospital and needs to be fixed, or somebody will be disciplined, instead of figuring out what the real problem is.
Yeah, it's, again, if everybody's complaining, going back to our original statement, and all the hospitals were complaining, you measure the quality of the bitching, and maybe there's some validity to it. And
Right.
You look into it, and instead of fixing the firefighter, maybe you fix the system if it's widespread like that.
Yeah. I have like a bunch of stuff I wanted to go into, but let's see.
There's a lot of stuff in the book.
Yeah.
A lot of, and it's not your typical, cookie cutter leadership book. It's real things, real experiences in the fire service. And I step outside that box of what would be, because there's a traditional way would tell you, well, you identify the problem, you discipline the firefighter, the problem goes away. And that's not the solution these days. It's not what I have found that has worked over my 44-year career.
Well, even when you say it's not your typical leadership book, and obviously anybody that hangs out with you for just a little bit of time knows you're a servant leadership type of model person. It's pretty amazing how sometimes the fire service thinks that servant leadership is just this brand new leadership model, which it's not new at all. Just look at another, not your SOP book, but another book way back in the day called the Bible. That's servant leadership. That's where a lot of that comes from. But
Jesus was definitely a servant leader. So
yes, but when we start talking about, there's even a question in here that you have in one of the follow-up things that talks about what type of leadership style are you? And for those of you that are on the show, like looking to promote to company officer or looking to promote to chief officer, knowing what type of leadership style you are and how you enact it is a huge thing, because you have to know yourself. And unfortunately, I think that like when we sit on interview panels, a lot of times on this side of the table, unfortunately, the right answer becomes the wrong answer, because I hear it all day long. I hear situational leadership and servant leadership all day long, because those are the two right answers. But at the same time, if you don't have your own like thought process on, well, this is how I'm going to run my company, or this is how I'm going to run the division or battalion or whatever, you got to come up with it. So what's some other stuff that you have as far as servant leadership and how you came to that style and why?
So it really, I didn't know it, but my mom laid the foundation for me as a servant leader, because that's how she was. She was always about serving others and doing for others. And so, when I when I started in St. Louis, the battalion chiefs were gods, and the deputy chiefs were somewhere above that if possible. And the fire chief was, oh my God, they like walked beyond water, on water. And that's how they were viewed. And as I grew in my profession, in my own profession, I came to understand that's not how it should be, because ultimately it's not about serving me. It's about serving as a citizen on the street. That's where the focus should be at, that we should be out there serving the citizen. And who serves the citizen is not generally me. It's the person who's working on that truck. And so our focus as leaders should be the person on the truck. It's my job, and my job, as I see it, is at the bottom of the organizational chart. I'm at the very bottom of our table of organization, because my job is to serve my firefighters and make sure they have all the tools and all the resources, all the education, all the training, everything they need to make sure that they're taken care of, as Bruno Cini used to say, Mrs. Smith. And because that's ultimately who we're serving. It shouldn't be the other way around. I've seen so many organizational charts where the fire chief is at the top. Not in my case. I'm at the bottom of the organizational chart. And that has worked for me, is that my focus is on my people, because ultimately they're the ones that are delivering the service. And it's also my focus is on their safety too, because I want to make sure that they go home at the end of their shift the same way they came to work. And so I have completely inverted the table of organization, and I now see myself at the bottom. I accept that I'm at the bottom because I'm there to serve others.
Well, and that goes back to another Bruno Cini thing, is it makes it really simple when your mission statement's only 5 words, right? Like in Phoenix: prevent harm, survive, be nice.
Yes.
And that's when you invert that organizational chart, like you talk about, to where I'm at the bottom and my job is to just prevent harm, survive, be nice for our organization. They're going to do it on the street for the Mrs. Smith.
Exactly. And I tell you what, it works. It's hard for me to fathom that a fire chief would be sitting in a position to think that it's all about them, that all homage and all glory should be given to them because of who they are. I'm nothing here. It's how I truly see myself. I am nothing. The focus should be on my firefighters and my staff, because they are the ones that make things work. So when I go to City Hall, I'm fighting for them. I'm fighting for this fire department. Well, mindful that the city also have to balance the needs of the city too. But at the same time, my focus is on them. And truly, if you read anytime I send you an email, at the bottom of my email, it clearly says that my first priority is service to our citizens and the safety of my employees. And I mean that. My first priority here as fire chief is the service to our citizens and the safety of my employees. That's my utmost, that's my priority every day. And I don't make a decision, whether it's administrative or whatever, without thinking the impact of both those things and what the impact's going to be.
Well, that brings us to another portion of the book where you talk about making decisions. And from your position, the scene safety for you, or the safety for your people, isn't like on scene most of the time as the fire chief. You're making more of those non-discretionary time decisions. So cover some of the stuff in the chapter that talks about taking the time to make those decisions.
Yeah. So one of the biggest mistakes, and I was guilty of this early on, Jesse, is that I see our brains are wired. And I've made these mistakes too. And our brains are wired. And if you don't think your brain is wired, I encourage you to go watch a YouTube video called The Backwards Bicycle. And it's people that think they can ride a bicycle, that the handlebars are turned the other way. So while we would normally balance ourselves riding, we might turn right to balance ourselves. You would actually have to turn left to balance yourself. And so the handlebars are inverted. And nobody can ride this bicycle because our brains are wired how to ride a bicycle. Our brains are wired on how we make decisions in the fire service. We go on calls every day. You've been on a truck, you go out the door, you respond to someone's address. You're going there because there's a problem. You identify what the problem is and you fix the problem, and you get back on your truck and you come back home to the station. And we do that countless times throughout our career, day in and day out. And when it comes to making administrative decisions, we do the same thing. We're confronted with a problem. We identify all the problem. We identify in our mind what all the solutions are based on the information we have at that moment, and we make a decision. And unfortunately, sometimes we make a wrong decision because we don't have all the information, just like we might make a wrong decision on a scene because we don't have all the information yet, but we don't have the luxury of waiting around and trying to get more information on the scene. So, but we do have the luxury and the discretionary time when we're sitting in our offices. So I encourage chief officers in our profession all the time that if you have an administrative decision that is questionable, don't make a decision right now. Pick up the phone, call. I have my HR director and my lawyer here and our city attorney on speed dial because I talk to them often about a lot of things. And the reason why is because I'm not on an emergency scene. I don't have to make a decision right now. I'll pick up the phone and call them and see what they think. I'll give you an example. You know, Jesse, if you were working a fire scene, let's say you're the incident commander in the car and you got your TAC board in front of you and you're running a scene, you're managing multiple companies on a first alarm. Your city attorney, if they got in the car and started telling you how to run the fire, you probably laugh at them. And the inverse is true. They're probably sitting in their office laughing at you as you try to handle a personnel decision without talking to them when it comes to HR issues or some other legal issue. So my point is use your discretionary time. Take the luxury of not making a decision right now, although your brain is wired to do so, and take your time and then maybe talk to others, weigh out all the options. I have found that when I don't make a decision right now and I have a chance to talk to others, a lot of times I get a solution that I haven't thought of or things I haven't even considered. And it gives us the opportunity to make a wise decision. So long explanation, but if you're not on an emergency scene, as I tell chiefs, you don't have to make a decision right now when someone walks in your office.
Yeah. Well, and I actually broke that rule not too long ago, a couple of weeks ago. I sent an email to a chief officer at 5 a.m. after a very long night of running calls. And it's one of those things like I even know that rule. Before you send that email, take time. Does it need to go on right now? Rethink what you got going on. But I unfortunately pushed send. So I totally understand.
Abraham Lincoln was good for that. He would write what they call hot letters. And he would, you know what he did with that letter? He would put it in a drawer for about 3 days because he wrote it when he was emotional. And then after 3 days, after he calmed down and had time to think about it, he would decide where that letter should be sent or not. And quite frankly, the majority of times he did not send that letter. So, and I'm guilty of it too. I've written emotional emails in the past, and I've learned not to send those, hit that send button, because you can't retrieve that email. And so, yeah, it's best if you use the luxury of your discretionary time to either write the email or make a decision.
Yeah, and I wish I would have read that portion of the book about Abraham Lincoln's hot letters, but I think I read that like 4 or 5 days after I sent that email a couple of weeks ago. So,
but you know, that's part of the learning process. It's part of growing. It's part of developing. It's part of you developing as a leader, and that's okay as long as you learn from our mistakes. That's the rent we pay for living, as I say. And we will make mistakes. Guess what? I'm going to make mistakes too, but I try to learn from those mistakes. I encourage everyone to try to learn from your mistakes so you don't repeat them.
Yeah, and I know you talked about that several times in the book too. So that's all great stuff. One of the things actually very early on in the book, I'm going to go somewhere else real quick.
That's fine.
So let's talk about just the last chapter that talks about leave your uniform in your locker. And I had this conversation with Solka not too long ago. There was a conference. He was up on the big stage with a couple of other instructors, and they're all asking them questions. I think it's him and Lasky and somebody else. And one of the questions that was asked to John was if there was one thing that you could do in the fire service differently, what would it be? And he said, I would have spent more time at home. I would have, so I constantly hear that, whether it's on here or doing firefighters and fire trucks getting ice cream. I've heard it a couple times. Is these chief officers that you're hearing this great stuff from that have been in the business for a long time? It's make sure you take time to take the uniform off.
You're right. So you talk, if you ever talk to a person who's worked in a private ambulance and they do these long distance transfers where they're taking somebody who's probably in the last week of their life, they're taking them for chemotherapy or radiation therapy, and it's a last ditch effort, and they're transferring to some major hospital in a major city 2 or 3 hours away. If you ever talk to those people, they have time to sit in the back of the ambulance during that transport and talk to these dying patients. And one of the things that comes up continually as a theme that they'll tell you is that that person says, I wish I had spent more time with my family and not worked so much. And so it's correct. You got to have some life balance. You got to, because family is so important as you come to the end of your life and you look back over your career and maybe the accomplishments you had, but also your family is important. And so I stress that in the book, that family has to be a part of your life. And I'm guilty of this myself. I'll never forget working in St. Louis, and I came home and I'm working on stuff in my office, and my son, who was probably about 5, 6 years old, came in and said, hey, Dad, want to play catch? And I go, I can't do that right now. I'm too busy. And I regret that I said that to him to this day. And I still remember doing that because, I'm blessed to have had a son that wanted to play catch with me. How many fathers have lost their sons? How many men have not been able to father a child? The list goes on. And so here I got a son that wants to play catch with me. So I took the opportunity from there on. I spent a lot of time with my son and my daughter. And, we did a lot of things together, and including playing catch. And those are things I have memories of now. Even though I had a torn rotator cuff and it killed my arm to throw that ball sometimes, I still played catch with my son.
Yeah, I saw a chief officer at the fire station a couple of months ago. He was off duty in his regular clothes, but he's probably there for a couple of hours knocking out some stuff. And he's got his daughter with him. I think she's 14 or 15 at the time. And so I'm talking to her for a while, and it's like, well, you're hanging out with Dad today. She's like, yeah, it's my birthday.
Oh my God.
And it's like, well, he's going to take me out after this. It's like, after what? Like, so he's already been here for 2 hours already. And it's just, sometimes we do it to ourselves. I'm on vacation, like I told you right now, hanging out with you on Zoom. So I'm going to wrap this up so I can actually go home. And
be with your family.
Yeah, right. On my vacation, but we had this scheduled already, and it worked out. So now, early on in the book, wrapping this up, there's a thing right off the bat that talks about reading books, learning leadership, not only from the fire service, but from the military. I know you're a big military buff. We could have probably spent 2 more hours talking about that stuff. But in the contemplations portion, you talk about what was the last book you read. Luckily, I have a book club, so the last book I read was yours. But
thank you.
For you, besides you probably going through this, preparing for your meeting today, what was the last book you read?
So I read multiple books at the same time.
I do on this.
So now you got me thinking, but so I listen to books, and I'm listening to, I don't know if you can see it or not. It's not showing up well, but it's called let me see. You can't read it on there, but it's called Black Box Thinking. There it is.
Okay.
So why most people never learn from the mistakes, but some do. So so that's the book I am listening to right now. And to answer your question, and I'm going to see what the other book was I was reading here. So I was also reading, we talk about, let me pull this one up here.
If the
Hold on.
target is
It was called The Bomber Mafia.
Nice.
And it talks about the history of bombers throughout United States history and how it came about and how they use, and so that sort of stuff. So that was an interesting book too, on the theory of bombing and use of bombing basically to influence the outcome of war. So
So yeah, it's very hard to have excuses now when everything's in an audio book to not be reading. I know there's a true value of reading and highlighting and writing notes. And just like you with you writing your book and me writing mine, it was just snippets of flashcards that we're writing down or jotting stuff in our phone. And I think that nothing takes the place of reading a book, and now being able to explore your book with you on here has been awesome. So
I appreciate it. And yeah, I encourage your listeners to, and even if you're not going to get a book, podcast, there's so many podcasts out there that have just a wealth of information in there. And so I'm also guilty. I have Sirius radio in my car, and I don't even listen to music anymore because I'm listening to podcasts or on my way to work or listening to books. And it's just, I confess I hardly listen to music at all because of just the wealth of information that's out there to listen to and the fascinating information that's out there.
You were just on the Firefighter Success podcast with Jim Moss, another author we've had on the show. So
yeah, and Jim's an outstanding individual too,
yes.
And I was honored to, with his a wonderful book too on firefighter success too. So yeah, there's another outstanding person too. That's Jim.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we're going to wrap it up. I'm going to let you guys ask questions here. Gary will wrap up the show and then throw it out to you guys.